Okay, today is the 15th part of the Bhagavad Gita section of the Bhakti Shastri course. And today we're going to be finishing up chapter 7. Last time we went through the first 15 verses. Actually, it's 16 through 30. On the PowerPoint here I have it 15 through 30. Almost typo there. But it's 16 through 30. We did 1 through 15 last time and 16 through 30 this time. Last time we finished up with the four sorts of persons who do not surrender to Krishna. So this section of chapter 7 through 12 are going to be about bhakti, exclusively about bhakti. And so we heard the last thing we finished up with was there are certain sorts of folks that will never surrender to Krishna. And in this first verse here, 7:16, we'll hear about the four kinds of folks that do. Okay? So we'll hear about a little bit about who does take to bhakti. We already discovered at the beginning of the chapter that it's very rare. That it's something that's extraordinary because of its rarity. So 16 is O best among the Bharatas. That means Arjuna. Four kinds of pious men, these are called Sukritas or Sukritinos. Pious men begin to render devotional service unto me, the distressed, the desirer of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the Absolute. Prabhupada says in the word-for-word translation, one who knows things as they are. So they're looking to extend their considerable knowledge. So Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, unlike the miscreants, these are the four types, the evildoers, who don't surrender. He says, these are adherents of the regulative principles of the scriptures, and they are called Sukritana, or those who obey the rules and regulations of scriptures. Krita means to do, and so they do things properly. They obey the rules and regulations of scriptures, the moral and social laws, and are more or less devoted to the Supreme Lord. And he says, these are not pure devotees, because they have some aspiration to fulfill in exchange for devotional service. Pure devotional service is without aspiration and without desire for material profit. So already we get this notion that there's going to be varieties of devotional service. Prabhupada uses the word pure here, and there will also be mixed. It's usually a mishra that's usually called. Types of devotion where people worship God for some other purpose. They have some desire that they want fulfilled. He says an aspiration to fulfill in exchange for devotional service. So the four pious people, it says that they are following, what Prabhupada says, and also in the purport, when these four kinds of persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service, and are completely purified by the association of a pure devotee, they also become pure devotees. And then he says, on the whole, when the distressed, the inquisitive, the seekers of knowledge, and those who are in need of money are free from all material desires, and when they fully understand that material remuneration has nothing to do with spiritual improvement, they become pure devotees. So he gives a transition here, how one goes from a mixed to a pure devotion, or uttama bhakti it's called, the best type of bhakti. And we'll discuss a little bit about the differences in the results of those shortly. And then Prabhupada makes this very wonderful statement in the purport. He says, as far as the miscreants are concerned, these are the people that do not surrender, according to text 7:15 of the Bhagavad Gita. For them, devotional service is very difficult because their lives are selfish, irregular, and without spiritual goals. We'll hear later on how this is why this is really detrimental to being able to understand Krishna, or even the self. We've already heard quite a bit about that. But even some of them, by chance, when they come in contact with a pure devotee, also become pure devotees. And when we read the previous verse, the 7:15, and heard about the four types of folks who do not surrender, we really had to become among them. There really are hardly any other sorts of folks these days. The vast majority of people are like that. It says here that the people that surrender have to be pious. It means that they follow the rules and regulations of the scriptures. They follow, it says, the varnashram system. So they perform pious karma. They do their duties according to the scriptures. They're self-controlled in many ways. And that gives them the ability to be inclined towards God. Otherwise not. And so, primarily this is what we have on the earth these days, are people who will not surrender. And increasingly so. And so the hope here, it says that the crucial point is that those who have devotion, pure devotion, can give it. And for those who have somehow surrendered, they're pious people, surrendered in these four different ways that are listed today, they are mixed in some way. Whereas, but they can be taken to pure devotion through the association of someone who has it. Fortunately, even persons who aren't otherwise qualified. This is why, Srila Prabhupada and the other followers of Lord Chaitanya, have tried to spread around the world and give to everyone. That even if you don't have previous qualification, that association can work directly. So even the persons who are unqualified, who will not otherwise surrender, through the influence of their association with a pure devotee, may do so and take up the path of pure devotion. This is the wonder of that particular path, along with a different result. Then 17, Krishna focuses on one of those four. This is the jnani, the one who is looking to enrich their knowledge. And he says, of these, the one who is in full knowledge of me, it's just a jnani, it says in the word-for-word translation, and who is nitya yukta, always engaged in pure devotional service, eka bhakti, only in service, always engaged in bhakti, is the best. For I am very dear to him, and he is dear to me. Okay, so this one is different. The one is, and we'll discuss a little bit afterwards, after the next verse, what distinguishes that one from the other three, and but we'll just go with it now. So it says that someone who has knowledge of Krishna, and they're always engaged nitya yukta, and engaged only in bhakti. They're special and very dear to Krishna. Okay? And Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, free from all contaminations of material desires, the distressed, the inquisitive, the penniless, and the seeker after supreme knowledge can all become pure devotees. So it says that when the four different varieties, when they meet a pure devotee, they can give up their desires. But out of them, he who is in knowledge of the absolute truth, this is the jnani, the one who seeks after knowledge, and free from all material desires, becomes a really pure devotee of the Lord. And that gives a clue about his special nature, it's mixed, but he doesn't have the same type of desires as the other ones do. And then Prabhupada says, by searching after knowledge, one realizes that his self is different from his material body, and when further advanced, he comes to the knowledge of impersonal Brahman and Paramatma. When one is fully purified, he realizes that his constitutional position is to be the eternal servant of God. So the Gyanis, they've gone through, the Gyanis talked about in this particular series of verses, have gone through that process. They understand their self as a spirit soul. They have some understanding of the impersonal feature of the Lord, that everything is Brahman. We talked about that in the earlier chapters. And they have some understanding of Paramatma. And now they've come to the point where they understand something about Bhagavan. So they understand something about Brahman and Paramatma, the super soul, being expansions and manifestations of Bhagavan. So their knowledge has now come to really serious fruition, and that's what makes them really special. And then continuing in this vein, Krishna says in 7:18, he says, all the devotees, that means all, the first three, as well as the Jnani, who's so special, are undoubtedly magnanimous souls. But he who is situated in knowledge of me, I consider to be just like my own self. Being engaged in my transcendental service, he is sure to attain me, the highest and most perfect goal. So here, Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, the devotees who want some benefit out of devotional service are accepted by the Lord. This is a very sweet purport, he said. Are accepted by the Lord because there is an exchange of affection, he says. Out of affection, they ask the Lord for some material benefit, and when they get it, they become so satisfied that they also advance in devotional service. But the devotee in full knowledge is considered to be very dear to the Lord because his only purpose is to serve the Supreme Lord with love and devotion. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he explains that that there's types of mixed devotion that we've talked about before. We mentioned in the earlier chapters when we talked about the yoga ladder that any of the other yogas needs some mixture of bhakti. So that's not really considered to be mixed devotional service. It's considered to be whatever yoga is there with a little bit of bhakti mixed in. So when you have mixed bhakti, it means the bhakti has to predominate. It has to be the biggest part of the mixture, and there's a little something else that's attached to it. So if there's a lot of karma yoga or a lot of jnana yoga or a lot of dhyana yoga, and it's mixed with a little bit of bhakti, then it's considered to be karma yoga, jnana yoga, and dhyana yoga actually properly performed because a little bit of bhakti is necessary for it to be successful. But when the predominant part is bhakti, but there's some other things mixed in, then it's properly called mixed bhakti or mishra bhakti. So the people here that are called mixed devotees, the primary thing is bhakti. And that's why it says that there's an exchange of affection. So they have some regard for the Lord. They have some appreciation for the Lord. It's not it's not a mechanical process that they're trying to get something. They understand something of the Lord, and they're approaching the Lord and asking for his kindness. So it says there's an exchange of affection which makes the Lord happy to satisfy them in whatever way is reasonable. And it says because of that exchange, then their connection with the Lord deepens. And it says they become so satisfied that they also advance in devotional service. Okay? And then, so there's examples given by the commentators about these four types of persons that surrender to the Lord: pious people, persons who have a background of pious activities following the Vedas. The distressed, the example is Gajendra, the king of the elephants, who in a past life had been a human devotee, and he was being attacked in the water by the king of the crocodiles, and somehow remembered through the grace of the Lord to pray to the Lord for deliverance. The inquisitive is the head of the assembly of Brahmins who listened to the first recitation of Srimad Bhagavatam, Shonaka Rishi. So when the Bhagavatam was first recited, it was Shukadev Goswami with Parikshit Maharaj, but there was a whole assembly of sages and brahmanas who had come to witness it, and Shonaka Rishi was the head of that, and he was the one who was conveying the questions at first I'm sorry, this is the second recitation. Shonaka, it's with Sutta Goswami, and Shonaka Rishi was asking Sutta Goswami. They had gathered together at Naimesharanya for the sacrifice. The Bhagavatam is this nested series of discussions, and so I got into the wrong nest there momentarily. But he was asking Sutta Goswami, who had been at the original recitation and then was giving it again. And so there was the whole assembly of Brahmins who were performing sacrifice at Naimesharanya for the welfare of those of us here in the modern age of Kali. The needy are those who wanted something. The example is Dhruva Maharaj, the young boy who wanted a kingdom greater than anybody else in his family. He was the son of the not favorite wife of the king, and therefore wasn't going to be able to ascend to the throne. And he was upset by that and wanted to find some way to have a kingdom better than any of his forefathers. Okay. And all of those have material desires. That's the thing that binds them together. They want some kind of, either it says knowledge of the soul or knowledge of scripture that they can use. The inquisitive, the needy, they want something material, and the distressed want to have something removed, something that's causing them pain removed, or in distress, and so they have that removed. So there's more on the material plane. That's what they want to have in exchange for that service. Lord, I have this problem, or I have this desire. Basically, is how it comes. I'm coming to you because you can help me, and I have this problem I can't deal with. But the fourth one, and the example are the four Kumaras, the sons of Brahma who remained as young children all their lives to avoid growing up and having a sex desire and the other things of adulthood. Wanted to stay young and innocent, and they live on the higher planets. And that person, the Jnani, has no material desire. It's more like an aspiration. Prabhupada said they have either aspirations or material desires in his purport. And they have more like an aspiration. Now that they've come to understand, they've understood themselves as a soul, they've understood the all-pervading aspect of the Supreme, the Brahman effulgence, we've talked about quite a lot. And they've understood the Paramatma, we talked about that in chapter 6 so much. The localized form in the heart. And now they've understood that there's an actual form of the Lord that's the source of all of those things, and are now beginning to serve, and they have some aspiration to have a greater understanding and to get closer to the Lord. And but they're still considered to be that they're mixed with that aspiration. The pure devotion, pure service, simply is concerned with the pleasure of the Lord. There's no personal interest of any kind. And that cannot be attained through knowledge. The only way you can catch that is you have to catch it from somebody who has it. It's something that has to be learned. In some ways it's really counterintuitive, because the Lord, we've talked through Isha Upanishad, and we talked last week in the first half of this chapter about how the Lord is everything, really. the source of everything, the controller of everything. So what service does he need? That's the logical conclusion. And so you'll see that the Gyanis, they can't understand this mood of simply wanting to please the Lord constantly, like the pure devotees do. So that you can't do that through knowledge. It takes somebody who has it, and then you can pick up on it. You can understand when you see what they do, what they feel, how they're acting. Then it clicks. Otherwise, you'll never come to that point. So in that case, they're all mixed, and all the different acharyas agree on that point. They analyze it a little bit differently, but they all agree that they're mixed. And then Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, I think, gives a real detailed explanation here that I found kind of useful. And he said what each of these types of categories of service, of devotion produce, what's their result. And so for the first three, who have material desires, so bhakti mixed with material desires, it first of all produces the desired material effect. We see in the Bhagavatam, we have the example of Dhruva Maharaj, the young boy who wanted the kingdom. When he finally met the Lord, he realized that his desire was very trivial. He got a chance to meet the Lord face to face, and he thought that his desires were then very small. He had attained something by meeting the Lord that was much greater than any material thing even conceivable. So he says that I was looking for pieces of broken glass and I found a gem, and so he wasn't any more concerned with the fulfillment of his desire. But even so, he was given it. He was given the desire. He got the kingdom that was greater than any of his forefathers. So they get the desired result, and then later on it says it's followed by one of two things. If they stay on that same track, they still have some notion of material desires. Then they get what's called salokya mukti, or liberation, living on the same planet as the Lord in one of his forms. And it says their predominating mood is of happiness, and they have opulence and power. And but it says if through the Prabhupada says, that by the performance of their bhakti, their devotion, sometimes they lose their material desires, and then they become elevated to the level of the jnani. They change. They become a desireless, mixed devotee. But if they carry on the same track at the end of life, they can, or at least maybe not this life, but at the end of one of their lifetimes, they will end up on the same planet as the Lord, and they'll be very happy, and they'll be, because it says they have on Saloki you also have some of the similar opulences. There's descriptions in the there's the Sanatana Goswami's book, the Brihat Bhagavatamritam, and also in the Srimad Bhagavatam, where the residents of Vaikuntha are flying. They all have the same form also. They look like Lord Vishnu, and they're flying on their vimanas, their little flying devices, and little airplanes flying around Vaikuntha with their wives, happily enjoying the environment. So there is lacking there is a lot of service. They feel very, they feel very fortunate and delighted to be able to live on the Lord's planet. They certainly see him as the master of everything. They have given up their notion of being the controllers and the owners. They've been purified, but they don't have much inclination towards service, and they're not in the Lord's association so much. They're enjoying this wonderful spiritual environment in a very, in a legitimate way. And it says then, but the mixed bhakti of the jnani, the one who is special, that's described in this section, leads Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur says to shantarati, or the shantaras, the peaceful relationship. And in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, this is described, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 19, text 212, is actually a quotation of another verse from someplace else, but it says, when one's intelligence is fully attached to my lotus feet, this is Krishna speaking, but one does not render practical service, one has attained the stage called Shantarati. So again, there's not a lot of service, but unlike the persons who just have happiness and are kind of enjoying the environment, they're very, very much attached to the Lord. Mm-hmm. So there's a closer connection. But it's more a situation of adoration. You simply adore and are amazed by the Lord. And that understanding of how powerful the Lord is, how all-powerful He is, makes you feel that there isn't anything you can do besides adore. The Lord already is everything. What can you do for the Lord? How can you make somebody happy who has everything? So it's there's four main relationships: servitorship, right, friendship, parental love, and romantic love. And sometimes the Shanta, the fifth one, is thrown in, but many times the acharyas consider it to be not a real rasa, because it's not much. It's because rasa means kind of relationship, and there isn't a lot of relationship there. There's just kind of passive adoration. So that's what happens to them if they just carry out. If they don't meet a pure devotee and catch pure devotional service, that's where they end up. It says also that they don't desire liberation. They don't desire anything material. They're very much attached to the Lord. So it's a very exalted position. The difference with pure devotion is that one enters into a closer relationship. One is serving, one is a friend, one is a parent or a romantic partner. There's a notion that I can please the Lord, and the Lord is happy with that, even though the Lord is so great and I am so small. That there's a relationship between the two of us that's much stronger in pure bhakti. So my comment is that pure bhakti is gotten through the mercy of pure devotees. It's the only way to get it, and it's available to everyone. So the general path that's been given here in Bhagavad Gita is that you have the four pious people. So after a long time of performing pious activities, they may have the chance to begin this mixed bhakti, and then if they're fortunate, they may meet pure devotees and take up the process of pure devotion. For those who don't perform pious activities, it first looks like they are out of luck. Okay? They aren't going to take to the path of mixed bhakti because of their not having the pious credits and because of being too materially absorbed. They can't understand themselves. They can't understand God. There's no way. But there's a loophole for them because pure bhakti can be given to anybody. And in this day and age, the age of Kali, which is said to be the worst possible circumstances, especially for this gradual process of performing pious activities, taking up mixed bhakti and moving forward, people are increasingly unable to do that and uninterested in doing that. And that these days, that's the only way to get it. But it's very prevalent. The mercy of the devotees is very prevalent in this day and age. And so in that case, in that respect, this day and age is very amazing and desirable. So then in the next verse, This is a verse that Prabhupada quotes many, many times, 719. After many births and deaths, he who is actually in knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all that is. Such a great soul is very rare. And Prabhupada says in this one, he says, in the beginning of spiritual realization, while one is trying to give up one's attachment to materialism, there is some leaning towards impersonalism. But when one is further advanced, he can understand that there are activities in the spiritual life, and that these activities constitute devotional service. And then he says, thus he thinks of everything in relation to Vasudeva or Sri Krishna. Such a universal vision of Vasudeva precipitates one's full surrender to the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna as the highest goal. Such surrendered great souls are very rare. So here we're talking, all of the commentators agree, we're talking about pure devotion. This notion of understanding the Lord as everything. This we already covered a lot in the we covered it a whole lot in the Ishopanishad, but in last week's class, in the first half of chapter 7, we talked about that. Krishna talked about how he was the source of all of everything here in this world, and everything, that he's the source and sustenance of everything. And when you have that, then you have the confidence to surrender. Like, who do you want to surrender to? Who do you want to put your faith in? Or what do you want to put your faith in? Generally, if you pick anything that's not absolute, right, then you're looking for certain strengths or weaknesses. You take shelter of something, but it can't be universal. You may be protected from some things, but some other things you may be vulnerable. What is it? What are you gonna surrender to? Who or what? What are you gonna put your faith in? Put your faith in education. You're gonna try to find powerful friends. What is your strategy for success? And usually whatever you do, you know that there's potential that it won't work out, because you don't have full control. There's going to be some circumstances that could may cause you to fail, and you can't control those circumstances. And so there's always something of a gamble. But with Krishna, he's the source of everything. He's the sustenance of everything. He is everything. And he's in full control of everything. Well, there's nothing that can fail about that. Krishna has you covered from all directions and in all times and places. So when we understand that there is such a being, it gives us the basis for faith. It says, yes, I can give myself fully to this enterprise of pleasing the Lord and having a relationship with the Lord. And I needn't worry about anything else. And it's that real basis, that kind of faith, that leads to pure devotion. The reason why people are coming in mixed devotion is that they think there's something that they need in order to succeed in life. And then maybe the Lord can give it to them. But when we understand that the Lord is in full control, all we need to do is have some relationship with Him, and everything will be taken care of. We can have faith in that. So the commentators on this verse, they have a little bit different ways of looking at it, but the upshot is the same. Baladev Vidyabhushan, he looks at it as talking about the three types of devotees that surrender, mixed devotees that surrender who have material desires. And after many, many, many births, then they may come to the point where they're jnanis. That's the Bahanam Janmani Ante, after many births. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he looks at it as it's talking about already the special jnanis that were talked about in that whole section. But it says they may take many, many births to gain the association of devotees to make the jump to pure devotion. Mm-hmm. And in Srila Prabhupada's commentary, it's just more, it looks like he considers that the whole process of self-realization, develops over many, many, many lifetimes before one has an opportunity, just to surrender and then, of course, get the mercy. But in any case, however you look at it, they all see this verse as a confirmation of the rarity of pure devotional service. And so the fact that we have received the opportunity to associate with pure devotees, well, we should appreciate that more and more. This is the 7th chapter. This is the second time it's mentioned how rare it is. So many people are endeavoring most people don't endeavor for perfection. Those that do and attain it, hardly any of those know Krishna. And now here, it's very, very difficult, very, very rare for that to happen. It's actually, when we get to the nectar of devotion, we'll hear how that's, especially advanced devotion, is very rarely attained. That's one of its characteristics. And we'll hear why. So now we're up to 720. We take on a little different tack here. We talked about those who were intelligent, who were pious, and then would surrender to Krishna. Now he says that of course we had persons who were miscreants and who would not surrender, and now we have this other sort of people. It says those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires, kamais by desires, kamai by desires, surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulation of worship according to their own natures. Now, remember, we said that the mixed devotees, they had material desires, but that was secondary. Mostly they had bhakti. So they had that. They said that there was an exchange, between them and the Lord, a sweet exchange between them and the Lord. And that's why the Lord reciprocated with them in that way. So here we have persons who have desires, but their desires are the overarching ruling factor of their lives. And so it says what they do is they, instead of surrendering to the Lord, they surrender to the various devatas or demigods, who they think will fulfill their desires very quickly. And we'll talk a little bit about why they do that, and what effect karma has on that. Prabhupada says in the purport, he says, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is recommended that whether one is a pure devotee and is free from all material desires, or is full of material desires, or desires liberation from material contamination, he should in all cases surrender to Vasudeva and worship him. So as intelligent people, whatever their situation is, right, they should understand something about the position of the Lord and consider he's the right one to deal with, whatever it might be. If you're filled with desires, have no desires, and have desires for liberation, whatever it is, you go there, because that's he's the real source of everything. Go right to the top. And then he says, because in Vedic literature there are recommendations for worshiping different gods for different purposes, such as a diseased man is recommended to worship the sun, Those who are not devotees of the Lord think that for certain purposes, demigods are better than the Supreme Lord. Because sometimes it's known that the Lord takes things away for those who are advancing in devotional service. This is if they have some material attachment that inhibits their devotion, sometimes He may take some of their opulence away. And for someone who's deep in devotion, they can understand that's a great kindness. The Lord is seeing that the person desires to come closer, but something is an obstacle, and He removes that obstacle. And even though it may at first be painful, it allows them the person to fulfill their real desire. But to somebody who sees only material things as important, that looks like maybe the Lord's not such a reliable person to approach for material happiness. This is mentioned in the Bhagavatam. And then Prabhupada says, therefore, a pure devotee never goes to demigods for satisfaction of his material needs. He depends on the Supreme Lord, and the pure devotee is satisfied with whatever he gives. We already heard, how the Lord is kind. So the Lord is all-powerful, and He's kind. He's suradam, sarvadehinam, kind, a well-wishing friend to all the living entities. So sometimes He doesn't give exactly what is desired, or it doesn't give it in exactly the same way that it's desired. He considers what's really the benefit of His devotee. Sometimes parents do that. They don't give their children everything that they want when exactly when they want, especially if they think it's harmful. So especially with the pure devotees, the Lord is trying to act for their benefit, even if it's not the way they were expecting Him or desiring Him to act. At least they're on the surface. Because if you're a pure devotee, your desire is to please the Lord and to grow closer to Him. You may have some preconceptions about that, but the Lord may realize that acting in a different way may be the best for you to cultivate that core desire of growing closer to Him and serving Him more. And so He may act in a way that isn't how you're anticipating or expecting or hoping for. But it's done out of a genuine desire for your welfare and to fulfill your deepest desire. So the Lord is not just, He's not mechanical in that way. It's a loving relationship. You don't want me to do that for you. That's not going to help you. We do that for each other sometimes. I don't want to. I'm not going to give you that. I'm not going to do that for you. That's going to be bad for you. Or He gives you something you don't expect that will be helpful. That gives you something happens that's wonderful. And so we heard about the power of kama in chapter 3. We talked about that power of desire, how it takes up different strategic locations in the body, the mind and the senses and the intelligence, and how the actions that we don't really desire can take place from the stimulation of the mind. The mind can think of something suddenly and become attached to it, and that gets the intelligence looking for how to fulfill it, and the senses eager to do it. Sometimes the senses are just they're used to some particular type of stimulation and they want it and they start the process. And sometimes the intelligence says, "Oh, there's an opportunity for something." We talked about that, and how that's an enemy to self-realization, because the desire, it increases the absorption We talked about this, that the whole first 6 chapters was so much focused on understanding ourselves as a spirit soul. And that's so hard to do and so important in devotion as well. We saw the difference that it makes, the transformation that happens in persons that can have an experience, they can experience themselves as their real selves, full and happy and complete and unharmed by anything, fully satisfied. We saw how then people don't have desires. Suddenly their karma goes away. Krishna gave that as one of the big remedies. Regulated behavior, but also that you had to understand how you are beyond all those things, all those places where karma is residing. You are the soul, you're beyond that. They don't have anything really to do with you. They're not an intrinsic part of yourself. But that karma, those desires, draw you in to the external. And by external, we also mean the mental part and the intellectual part. We think of that as internal, but it's also external to our own selves. And we get caught up and we want to see if what are our chances for the desires to be fulfilled? How is it looking? What are our prospects? How's it? We monitor that very carefully. We try to come up with plans how we can do it. We anticipate, the success. We fear the failure. So it draws our attention outward. We only have so much attention, and that attention, becomes absorption. That absorption becomes identification, and we forget that we're the ones watching. Desires cause us to see things, to increase duality. You have friends and enemies. Anything and anyone and anything that's in tune with fulfilling your desires. You're favorable to them. Those that are unfavorable, you're inimical towards them. And anything else that is neutral, you don't care much about. You're looking for ways to gain an edge, to get an angle to fulfill your desires. And it's very much you and your desires, and maybe your friends who help you with that against everybody else. It's not the kind of mentality that allows you to see the connection between things. We talk about how when somebody understands themselves as soul, they see everybody else as a soul. They feel connected to everybody. That, they're a soul like me, and you're feeling very content and happy and fulfilled. And even if somebody is acting inimically towards you, you understanding that, it's just so unfortunate because underneath all of their difficulties, they can see that they're an illusion. Underneath that, they are complete and full and happy just like you are. So they see others in comparison with their own selves. It said in the 6th chapter. So the karma pulls us away from self-realization. To understand God, very, very difficult in those cases. So they're just looking for the easiest and simplest way they can get what they want, and so therefore they go to the devatas instead of the Supreme Lord. And then Krishna says, I am in everyone's heart as the super soul. As soon as one desires to worship some demigod, I make his face steady so he can devote himself to that particular deity. And Prabhupada says, God has given independence to everyone. Therefore, if a person desires to have material enjoyment and wants very sincerely to have such facilities from the material demigods, the Supreme Lord, as Super Soul in everyone's heart, understands and gives facilities to such persons. Remember before, Krishna said, as everyone surrenders unto them, he rewards them accordingly. And then Prabhupada says something that seems to be contradictory, and so I wanted to bring this one up because this is this notion of complete control and freedom. There's a kind of a tension there. And then Prabhupada says, both the living entity and the demigods are subordinate to the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the living entity cannot worship the demigod by his own desire, nor can the demigod bestow any benediction without the supreme will. So on the one hand, so there's independence, and on the other hand, there's no independence. But what it is that they can't independently do those things. Man proposes and God disposes, or the devatas propose and God disposes. They can't do them independently, is what it is. They have their free will, and but they can't even act on their free will without the help of the Lord, the controller of everything. We talked about that a little bit in chapter 2. It says the soul neither slays or is slain, or that we think that the person who's heavily bewildered with ahankara, they think that they're the doer of things that are carried out by the modes of material nature. Well, still, as souls, we make decisions and we decide what to do, but we can't even move our physical bodies without the help of higher powers. So we can't do them independently. So in the same way, the living entities, the people may wish to worship the demigods. That may be their soul's desire. And the devatas may wish to reward them in some way. But the actual doing of those things takes help. So there's the desire and then the help that comes from the higher powers. So here again, Krishna is highlighting the fact that, why are you worshiping anybody else? Even if you worship these devatas to get something, I'm involved. He's highlighting that it's not a reasonable path to be taken. And then he says, endowed with such a faith, he endeavors to worship a particular demigod and obtains his desires. But in actuality, these benefits are bestowed by me alone. Krishna is the power behind the power. And Prabhupada says, the demigods cannot award benedictions to their devotees without the permission of the Supreme Lord. All power comes from Krishna. The devatas have some power of attorney over certain powers. And that's it. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that one who worships the Supreme Lord and at the same time desires material enjoyment is contradictory in his desire. So this is not so much on point with the verse, but I thought it was a beautiful insight that Prabhupada gave us, because we tend to want to do both things. We want to have some material enjoyment while we worship the Supreme Lord. We think, why should we have difficulties? Why shouldn't we be able to enjoy? And at the same time, be pious persons and worship the Lord. But here it says that the one who worships the Supreme Lord and at the same time desires material enjoyment is contradictory. They don't go well together. We think that that would be a nice combination. We want to do something spiritual. We want to deal with the Lord in some way, build our relationship. But at the same time, everybody wants to be happy. So why should we do it against the background of anything but happiness? Well, we just heard about that. The whole notion of trying to come to spiritual realization means coming to our understanding of ourselves as a soul, understanding of ourselves as eternal, understanding of our real life as eternal life, and our real connection with Krishna as our eternal life is harmed and defeated by material desires. It throws us back into feeling that we're part of this world, that we forget that we're spirit souls, that we forget that we're connected with Krishna. It brings us into forgetfulness. It brings us into a misunderstanding of reality. So everything that Krishna told Arjuna from the beginning is you have to control these things. Happiness and distress, attachment and aversion. Don't get into that. Let it all just play out. Don't worry so much what's happening on the material plane, on the level of sensations. says, first of all, you have to learn how to tolerate that. And then as you gain experience of yourself as a soul, then you won't even, it'll be the same. None of that stuff will be relevant to you. Right now we're taking it all very seriously because that's what we're used to. We think this is me, and my comfort is very important. I suffer when I'm not comfortable. But Krishna started that with Arjuna right away. He says, no, you're eternal. You're full. You're complete. You're changeless. You're untouched by anything. You need to pay less attention to the sensations and to happiness and distress. You need to have a higher goal and be focused on that. So the two things actually are contradictory. Then 723, it continues in the same theme here. Men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of the demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach my supreme planet. Of course, this highlights the fact that material things are not of great value. This is what Krishna told Arjuna right from the beginning. Those, the seers of the truth, the tattvadarshis, they analyze, they see two kinds of things. Some things are temporary and some things are eternal. And guess which one has most value? And so he was telling Arjuna, you go above the three modes of material nature. You go above the temporary and you seek the eternal. So Prabhupada says, it is not that everyone, regardless of whatever demigod is worshipped, will reach the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is denied here, for it is clearly stated that the worshippers of demigods go to different planets in the material world, but the devotee of the Supreme Lord goes directly to the Supreme Planet of the Personality of Godhead. And then he says, the results achieved by the demigods' benedictions are perishable because within this material world the planets, the demigods, and their worshippers are all perishable. So that's ultimately the biggest reason why it's a mistake. They're going for the wrong thing. They're going to the wrong people, the devatas, instead of the Lord, but they're going for the wrong thing. They're going for the temporary and not the eternal, and that's because of the power of kama over them. And Prabhupada makes this beautiful statement at the end of his purport. I had to include this. The Supreme Lord is unlimited. His favor is unlimited. His mercy is unlimited. Therefore, the mercy of the Supreme Lord upon his pure devotees is unlimited. Why would you go anyplace else, people? (724). Unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. So we talked a lot about this in the Isha Upanishad. Where it's people who are trying to speculate and understand what is supreme come to this notion that the all-pervading aspect is the most unlimited, the most perfect, the most amazing portion. That any specific entity or object has to be limited. And of course, Prabhupada argued that not having a form or activities is a limitation also. We saw all kind of arguments how the particular type of form of the Lord, in his particular nature, is completely unlimited. It's a fully rounded conception of non-limitation. Everything else is a partial conception. We heard so many arguments in that regard, but people tend to think that. Here he is, he's in a certain time, in a certain space, but by his other energies, he's all-pervading. We also understood that time and space are fully controlled by him. He can be anywhere and everywhere, simultaneously, successively, whatever he likes to do. So there's no limitation on that. So just being homogeneous and all-pervading, that's limited because there can't be any kind of variety. There can't be any activity. You can't have a form. You can't have activities. It said that he walks and does not walk. Right? So he doesn't have to walk for transportation. He can appear any place and be anywhere. He already is everywhere by his all-pervasive aspect, and he can be there personally everywhere at once and anywhere at once. But also he can walk if he wants. He can dance. The Brahman effulgence can't. Just sits there. So there's a conception of God that is a full consideration of unlimitedness, and no one would ever come up with that. It's just too mind-blowing. So some people think of me that way, that I'm a form that the Brahman effulgence has taken, that Sri Krishna says, kind of that you can relate to, so you can for your understanding. But Krishna, he says that's not true. He says they just don't understand me very well. And the Prabhupada mentions in the purport, he says, those who are worshippers of demigods have been described as less intelligent persons. And here the impersonalists are similarly described. So we talked about, so now we're talking about different people that don't approach Krishna. Lord Krishna in his personal form is here speaking before Arjuna, and still, due to ignorance, impersonalists argue that the Supreme Lord ultimately has no form. It's coming out of Krishna's own mouth, this Bhagavad Gita. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada goes on to say, it is stated that supreme realization begins from the impersonal Brahman and then rises to the localized supersoul, but the ultimate word and the absolute truth is the personality of Godhead. This is known. And later he says, in the Gita, the Lord says that although he is Aja, unborn, he still appears. These are the facts that we should understand from the Bhagavad Gita. We cannot understand how the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be impersonal. The imposition theory of the impersonalist monist is false as far as the statements of the Gita are concerned. Prabhupada has a long purport to this because there is such a strong influence of this impersonalist philosophy because it appeals to normal logic. It really takes a certain revelation to come to the higher conception. So it's so pervading. So Prabhupada usually argues against it at some length. So it's worth taking a look at the whole purport, but I took those little excerpts from it. And then 25, Naham prakasya sarvasya yogamaya samavritaha mudayam nabijanati lokamama jamavayam. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. Mm-hmm. So, Krishna is everywhere and is everything, but he's hidden from view, from everyone but the devotees. And Prabhupada says, it may be argued that since Krishna was visible to everyone when he was present on this earth, how can it be said that he is not manifest to everyone? But actually, he was not manifest to everyone. When Krishna was present, there were only a few people who could understand him to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So even when he appears on earth, he's not accessible to those people. The Supreme Personality of Godhead in his transcendental form of bliss and knowledge is covered by the internal potency of the Brahma Jyotir, and the less intelligent impersonalists cannot see the Supreme. On this account, he quoted the verse we read in the Isha Upanishad, where the devotee was asking for the his effulgence to be removed so you could see his face, his mukham. There's a reason behind it. I don't think Prabhupada mentions it here, but he mentions it many other places. And Krishna already did too. He says, as you surrender to me, I respond accordingly. And Prabhupada mentioned, how Krishna mentions how if someone wants to worship demigods, he gives them that intelligence. Prabhupada said we have certain independence. So if we do not wish, and we'll find out later, actually, it's coming up soon, but there's a verse that says we're all born in the delusion of desire and hate, and then Prabhupada gives the root desire and root hatred in his purport to that verse. And so Krishna's responding to us. If we do not want to deal with him, then even though he is everything and everywhere, he can make himself invisible. And unless that desire changes, he will remain so, and nobody can discover him. He says he's covered by his own energy. Even if he appears directly on earth, you can look at him right in the eye, and you won't understand who he was, who he is, much less see beyond this world to the spiritual world. So then he says, O Arjuna, as the Supreme Personality of God, this is 726, I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and all things that are yet to come. I also know all living entities, but no one knows me. But me no one knows. So here he's making the contrast, right, that he may be able to, he's covered from view by his Yoga Maya, but nothing covers anything else from him. Others cannot see him, but there's nothing that covers his knowledge. He sees everything. And Prabhupada says in the purport, Krishna knows every living entity because he is situated in every living being's heart as the supersoul. But despite his presence in every living entity as supersoul, and his presence as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the less intelligent, even if able to realize the impersonal Brahman, cannot realize Sri Krishna as the Supreme Person. And then he says, as it is stated in the third verse of this chapter, out of millions and millions of men, some try to become perfect in this human form of life, and of thousands and thousands of such perfected men, hardly one can understand what Lord Krishna is. Even if one is perfected by realization of impersonal Brahman or localized Paramatma, he cannot possibly understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, without being in Krishna consciousness. That means there's that desire there. You want to have some connection with Krishna again. That's why it can only happen in Krishna consciousness. We hear Krishna saying, I have no limitation on my knowledge. Everybody else is limited. And there's no Maya covering my knowledge. And then 727, O scion of Bharat, O conqueror of the foe, this is one. All living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by dualities arisen from desire and hate. Icha, dvesha. We had raga, dvesha. We have this sukha, dukkha. They're all really the same thing. Right? It says that he told Krishna, Arjuna right away, he has to try to tolerate these desires and attachments and aversions. Happiness and distresses, right? Distresses means you experience something that you're averse to. Happiness means there's something that you're attached to, or you have desire for. So, raga, dvesha, icha, dvesha, desire or attachment, and aversion, and happiness and distress. They're all very related terms, and that's what was guiding our lives. We're always looking to try to extract as much happiness as we can from our circumstances and to avoid as much unhappiness as we can. So he says that we're born into that, and that bewilders us. And we talked about that when we talked about kama, how that does. If we pay attention so much to the sense perceptions and how they're either pleasant or unpleasant, it keeps us focused on that plane of existence, and we cannot begin to understand ourselves as soul, what to speak of the super soul or the soul of everyone, the Supreme Lord. We see things as disconnected. It takes a holistic type of understanding to understand the Supreme Lord as we do. And the fact that we're connected with Him. When we're seeing things separated, and that's what we do when we're trying to fulfill desires or trying to avoid things that are unpleasant. We're looking for ways. We're looking for strategies to do that. We're looking for distinctions between things. If I do this will happen. If I do that, will happen. I'm trying to make different types of plans. I'm not seeing them as being controlled. We see that everything is under a supreme control. And if I go to Krishna and I surrender to Krishna, then I know that whatever happens to me, pleasant or unpleasant, has the capacity to make me grow in my relationship with Him. It's not happening by chance. It's not happening because of using this strategy or that technique. My plans were well-founded or poorly founded. So when we're thinking about trying to make adjustments like that, we're thinking how things are happening, in a disconnected way. Well, we know that everything is ultimately controlled by God. And if you go to Him, then there's a purpose and a rhyme and a reason behind everything. We're not trying to plan for contingencies so much. We're not trying to worry about this emergency. We're not trying to game the system in some way. And as long as we're doing those things, it's hard to see how everything is connected. Our intelligence just won't reach that way. We're looking to find out how we can manipulate things. We're looking for differences, not unifying forces. So as long as we're caught up with that, we will not be able to understand God. We will not be able to understand ourselves as a soul. And that's what keeps people locked in. And that's why, the material enjoyment and spiritual realization are antithetical to one another, no matter how much that is disconcerting to us. Prabhupada says in the purport, due to desire and hate, the ignorant person wants to become one with the Supreme Lord and envies Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is the root desire and hate right here. That we would like to be the center of everything, or at least the center of our own little place. My Guru Maharaj, he calls it, we have a God project. We at least want to have control over some area. Maybe we don't have the optimism to try to control everything, but we want to have some space, some life for us where we're in charge, we're the focus of attention, and we don't want anybody else to be that, at least in that space. So the notion that there's the Supreme Lord whom everyone should worship and adore, and that I'm not and shouldn't be worshipped and adored, is our kind of primal and fundamental attachment and aversion, Icha Dvesha. That we want to be somebody. Everybody wants to be somebody. We don't want to be a servant. We don't want to be a nobody. And when we know that there's one person who's the complete somebody, it's painful to us. So that's the root one that we have to overcome to be devotees. We have to say, no, Krishna is so wonderful. He's kind to us. It's wonderful that there's such a being like that. And I'm fortunate to be able to have a relationship with that being. I have the opportunity to see that, if I'm pure enough, to see that entity, to interact with that entity. It's a wonderful thing. Because I may be a nobody, but Krishna thinks I'm a somebody. I'm dear to Krishna. That has to be reversed. That notion of I want to be somebody. I don't want somebody else to be the somebody. Then Prabhupada says, such deluded persons symptomatically dwell in dualities of dishonor and honor, misery and happiness, woman and man, good and bad, pleasure and pain, etc., thinking, this is my wife, this is my house, I am the master of this house, I am the husband of this wife. These are the dualities of delusion. If somebody is unpleasant to us, we dwell on that. If somebody praised us, we dwell on that. Oh, this happened today, that happened today, this happened last month, and we stay focused. Not even in the moment, but we go over it again and again and again in our minds. And we take on these false identities. We're spirits. We're eternal. We're unchangeable. We're not who we think we are. So, and then there's text 28. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, and whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, are freed from dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. So we found out the big problem is that this fundamental attachment and aversion keeps us from being able to understand the Lord. So we see that now the necessity of pious activities for those who are coming through the gradual process to devotional service. And Prabhupada has this beautiful section of his purport. I just had to grab a whole bunch of it here because it was so nice. Those eligible for elevation to the transcendental position are mentioned in this verse. For those who are sinful, atheistic, foolish, and deceitful, it is very difficult to transcend the duality of desire and hate. Only those who have passed their lives in practicing the regulative principles of religion, who have acted piously, and who have conquered sinful reactions can accept devotional service and gradually rise to the pure knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then gradually they can meditate in trance on the Supreme Personality of God. This is kind of the recapitulation of the yoga ladder, or also just how people come to become the four types of persons who surrender. This elevation is. Then he said. Then he breaks. He changes the topic. He says this elevation is possible in Krishna consciousness, in the association of pure devotees. For in the association of great devotees, one can be delivered from delusion. So there's the gradual path by which one overcomes this raga, dvesha, icha, dvesha, attachment and aversion problem, kama, and the desire that comes that's behind that. You can go through and practice the yoga ladder. You can go through and practice all the rules and regulations of the scriptures, maybe for many lifetimes. And then you gradually build up your level of self-control and understanding. Or it says you can be in the association of pure devotees, and you can be delivered from that. So we're talking about the gradual process that culminates in mixed bhakti, and there's the pure path. And they, in order to become pure devotees, also have to get the association of a pure devotee. But even those who haven't done all this other background work, and maybe are amongst these unintelligent people, amongst the impersonalists, amongst the four types of persons that never surrender, if they get the association somehow, then that can be done simply by the association of pure devotees. The last two verses are preparations for transitions, as oftentimes happens in the Bhagavad Gita, to the next chapter, chapter 8, attaining the Supreme. And so the chapter text 29 says, intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. And so there's words here, Brahma and Adhyatmam, that are going to come up here, are going to be the topics of the next chapter. And also the notion of how to attain the Supreme. This notion of liberation is going to come in figure strongly in the next chapter. So we're starting to change this. Prabhupada says, in the purport, he says, only persons who perform activities in Krishna consciousness are actually entitled to be called Brahman, because they are actually endeavoring to reach the Krishna planet. So Prabhupada is also talking about reminding us of what real liberation is. Krishna told us that also earlier in chapter 4. It's going back to his plan, going back with him. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that this verse refers to another type of mixed devotee who has desires, material desires. This is mixed with a desire for liberation. So he says that there's those persons who had desires, who wanted, who needed something, somebody that were in distress, or somebody who was looking for, who were inquisitive. And then there's also those who seek liberation. Prabhupada quoted that verse actually, who has all desires, no desires, or desires for liberation should worship the Lord. He quoted that in one of the purports. So those three types of things. So the desire for liberation is there. So there's another kind of mixed bhakta who has a desire specifically for liberation. They can be yogis or jnanis, but it's mentioned. And then the last verse, we'll conclude our talk for today. And again, there's Adibhuta and Adidaivam in this verse. That'll be part of Arjuna's question in the first verse of next chapter. So there's a transition here. And those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation, of the demigods, and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. So there's one thing, again, it's this faith-building thing. If we understand he's already told us he's behind the material world, both the separated potencies and the higher potencies, all the living creatures. The spirit, the souls, and all the ingredients of the material world are him. And then he also mentioned he's the Lord of all sacrifices previously. So any kind of legitimate spiritual practice, he's the one. He already said before, he was the beneficiary of that. So he's the Lord of all types, and he's the ultimate goal of all types of spirituality. If you understand that, right, then you can feel confident in surrendering to him and taking shelter of him. And then but here it says, can understand, know me, even at the time of death. So again, we're transitioning to this notion of how one goes back to the Lord. There's that desire for liberation and going back to Krishna, which is going to be covered so much in the next chapter. And then there's a little excerpt from the purport. So Prabhupada, and this is beautiful here. Prabhupada says, the beginning of Krishna consciousness is association of persons who are Krishna conscious. So here he's talking about pure bhakti, because that's really what's available to us in this day and age. Such association is spiritual and puts one directly in touch with the Supreme Lord, and by his grace, one can understand Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At the same time, one can really understand the constitutional position of the living entity and how the living entity forgets Krishna and becomes entangled in material activities. We've been hearing so much about that. And it says that by serving Krishna, we should begin to experience that. We should see who we are really. Experience ourselves as soul and see how we didn't know that, how we were entangled and forgetful and ignorant, and how that process works. And of course our eyes will be opened wide when that happens. And then he says, in such a situation, he takes pleasure in hearing and glorifying the Supreme Lord in pure devotional service. He is convinced that by his doing so, all his objectives will be fulfilled. This echoes from 241 in the purport, where faith was described. This determined faith is called Dritavrata, and it is the beginning of Bhakti Yoga, or transcendental loving service, and pure, meaning pure Bhakti Yoga in this case. So Prabhupada here talks, he wraps up the chapter with a strong plug for pure devotional service. And we mentioned why, because that's this gradual path is not open to very many of us. If we're born here in the age of Kali, we usually do not have a background in pious activities. And so the people who are eligible for the kind of gradual path, perform all the pious activities, start out with mixed devotion and somehow encounter a pure devotee. That path is not open to much. Most of us are on, either we're, at best, demigod worshippers or impersonalists, or we're the four kinds of people who never surrender. That's, the predominating sort of person. So Prabhupada gives us this one beautiful plug at the end here for pure bhakti. So that's it. Next week we'll start chapter 8 and call it Attaining the Supreme. And thank you very much for your listening. Hare Krishna.